Hi there guys, got a video here for you today on the BSA R12, and in this one we're going to be conducting a full strip down of the rifle. Now before we get started, there are just a couple things that I want to mention. Firstly, I know stripping down the rifle will void my warranty. It's just something that I'm not interested in. I've never used a rifle warranty in my life. I don't intend to start using one now. If it breaks, I'll fix it, don't worry about it. The second thing that I want to mention is that I'm taking the rifle apart because I want to. I want to have a look inside, I want to see what's given us the accuracy issues, and I want to just have a poke round, see what they've done inside the rifle. I wanted to mention those two things before we get started because they're two very common comments that we get in the old YouTube comments, so I wanted to address them before we start. And finally, on a more positive note, thank you to everyone who showed up at the Pete's Airgun Farm boot sale. It was a roaring success, tons of people. So thanks to everyone who showed up. With that said, we can get started, and the first thing we're going to do is remove the stock by using a 4mm Allen key and removing the stock bolt in the bottom here. As you take that off, just make sure that the little dust cap that goes over the fill port doesn't get lost. The next thing we're going to do is degas the rifle. Now this bottle is valved, although it does need to be burped to be removed. So we're going to do that by loosening it a couple turns like so, and then dry firing it in a nice safe direction. As you dry fire it, just keep a close eye on the gauge on the bottom and make sure it's going down. If it's not going down and staying at bottle pressure, you just need to loosen the bottle a little more, and then once you get it to the correct point, the valve should de-seat and you'll be able to fire the air outside the rifle. So there we have it, we can now remove the bottle nice and safely. If you don't burp the rifle as you take the bottle off, once you unscrew it a certain amount, the air inside the rifle will try and get out and it will blow out this O-ring here. So it could damage that O-ring, although it normally stays in one piece. Next up, we're going to just unscrew the shroud just to make it a little easier to manipulate for the camera. And for anyone interested, this particular rifle is a 177 Super Carbine. Next thing we need to do is take out some anti-tampers. So as you can see here, we have 3 anti-tampers in this area and then one back here under the trigger. Now these ones here I did drill out on the mill, so what I'll do is we'll take out the trigger and then I'll show you some mill footage. To remove the trigger we need to remove these 3 E-clips here. The easiest way to get these out is by using a nice small flat bladed screwdriver, getting in one side and then just gently pulling the E-clip out. As you can see there, they come out fairly easily and there's plenty of room to get a small flat bladed screwdriver in the side of one. So there's 3 pins on this trigger, one at the front here, one in the middle and then one at the back. With the pins removed we can just use a 2mm punch to push the pins out from either side. With the front pin out we can remove the front trigger sear. This does have a small spring on the front of it, so just be careful that doesn't get lost as you take it out. The next pin is just a stop for the hammer, so we'll push that out nice and easily. And then the final pin is what holds the actual trigger blade in. Now this can be a little stiff as the pin itself does run through a number of nylon bushes. And as you can see there, a nylon bush on this side, a nylon bush on this side, along with the trigger spring. With the trigger removed you can see the final anti-tamper in the back of the block here. Now it has obviously already been drilled out, so what I'll do now is take you over to the mill and I'll show you how we've drilled the anti-tampers out. And here we are over at the mill. The first thing to do is to get the action clamped up in the vise. To do that we just got the action set up on some parallels and a piece of paper on either side to protect the action from getting marked. Once it's clamped up nice and tight we can start drilling out the anti-tampers. First up we're starting on the bigger middle one. And the first thing we're doing is centre drilling the end and then coming back through with a standard 5mm drill bit to drill out the centre. With that done we can move on the 2 closer to the bottle, and again we're just drilling these out with a 5mm drill bit. The last anti-tamper is a little trickier though, as this anti-tamper is offset from the actual screw head. What I had to do was drill it through first, then come back through with a flat bottomed end mill and just take the walls out. And with the anti-tampers drilled out, if we take a look beneath the caps, you can see a number of bolts. So two in the front there, one in the middle, and then finally one at the back here. The one at the back is offset. As you can see, the anti-tamper is covering only one side of the screw, so just be aware of that as you drill through. What we'll do next is remove the middle 3 bolts and then separate the 2 halves of the block. To begin with, we'll take a 4mm Allen key and loosen this middle bolt. What we're going to be doing is loosening all the bolts till they touch their respective anti-tamper caps, and then loosening them all together. You could probably use the screw head to push the anti-tamper out the top, but I like to do it this way as the threads beneath the screws may get damaged if you try and undo them all the way out. And with that done, that's the plate removed, with the screws and the anti-tampers still captive. So I've got just a little hammer here, tapping the big screw, and there we have the anti-tamper cap along with the screw. We'll do the same for the other 2. Being very careful not to lose the screws. With that removed, we can use a 3mm Allen key to remove this bolt here. This bolt does have a small doughty washer beneath it, so just be careful of that. And as we still have hammer spring pressure forcing the valve has popped itself out. So there we have it. There's the front block, and we're left with the rear block as well. So we'll put this to one side and concentrate on the front block. Right then, so starting off with this front block here, the first thing we're going to do is remove the gauge. To do that, we're going to locate these 2 flats here, one on either side, and then use a 2mm punch to gently knock those round. We need to be knocking them in the anti-clockwise direction to unscrew the gauge, and we're going to be using a 2mm punch. Once it's been cracked loose, we can just use the punch to push the corners round until we unscrew the gauge. And there we have the gauge. So the gauge is slightly different from the usual ones, as this outer housing rotates rather than the whole gauge as a whole. I probably will end up replacing this with a sort of standard size gauge. I'm not quite sure why they've used this. It might just be a size thing though. Although it is nice to see them using proper Wiki branded gauges. Next thing we'll do is remove this section here, which was on the R10 at least known as the toast rack. So we'll just remove that by removing the bolt in the front using a 3mm Allen key. With that removed, we can pull the toast rack up and remove it from the front there. Up next, we'll remove the valve housing, and to do that we're going to be using a 32mm spanner, coming across these 2 flats here like so, then gently unscrewing it. Being nice and careful not to scratch the housing with our spanner. And once we've got it out a few turns, we should just be able to loosen the valve by hand. There we have it. We do have this loose piece here on the end of the valve, and we do also have the reg in here. Before we get to that though, we will take the valve housing apart by just using a 5mm Allen key in this screw hole here. Now I will mention that my one was done up tight, although if your one isn't done up tight, you may want to note the location of the actual adjuster, as this will affect your valve return spring setting. There we have that part there. This does have a small washer, so this washer here in this housing. Then we have the valve return spring and also the valve. So there's the valve there, slightly different from the R10 one. To remove the regulator from the housing, what we're going to do is just tap it out, so nice and carefully, and the regulator should come out. If it's stuck in there, what you may have to do is reinstall your gauge or blank your gauge off, and then momentarily pressurize the unit with obviously the housing pointed down like so, so that the regulator doesn't fly out. But there we have the housing all disassembled. We could remove the bottle adapter if we wanted to, although these are normally Loctited in from the factory, so I'm not going to bother. We also do have this small screw on the bottom, That can be just removed using a flat bladed screwdriver, like so. And this just has a small dowty washer beneath it. There's nothing really beneath there, so I'm going to just leave that in for now. But if you've got a leak coming from this area, it's a screw worth checking. What we'll do next is have a look at the regulator. So we'll get these pieces pushed to the side. So taking a closer look at the regulator here, we have the adjuster screw on this end and the base cap screw on this end. The adjuster screw, this one here, does need to be measured before we touch it. So we're going to do that with a cellar calipers and just measure the distance between the top of the adjuster and the housing. On my rifle, that's about just under 1/4 millimeter. So we'll take a note of that measurement, and then when we come back to rebuild the rifle, we'll reset it to that measurement. To get the adjuster screw out, what we're going to do is just take a 4mm Allen key and lightly unscrew it. Here we have it. We do also have a small sealing disc in the end there, so this piece here, very much reminiscent of a humour regulator. What we're going to do next is unscrew this back cap. Now this is just a hole from the factory, so what I done was I just wedged an Allen key in there and then lightly unscrewed it. It was tight enough so I couldn't do it by hand the first time I took it apart, but with a small Allen key broached into the end there, you can remove it nice and easily. With that done, we'll remove the piston by gently pushing it out from this side, making sure not to lose the Belleville washers. So there we have it. So the regulator itself is very reminiscent of a humour regulator. So it's very similar with the small white sealing disc and the adjuster screw with the small nipple on the end. As you can see that there, small nipple on the end of the adjuster screw. Just looking at the regulator, it's definitely better than the R10 regulator, although I will say that the actual finish on the components isn't that great. If you take a look at the adjuster screw, this is supposed to seal on this little white disc here, and I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but if you look at it with the naked eye, you can see a number of scratches and marks in the actual sealing faces. Same can be said about the top of the piston. So the top of the piston doesn't look like a tremendously good finish. There are a number of scratches in that as well. So that could be causing some regulator creep issues. And whilst the rifle was fairly good over the chronograph, it's definitely an area that I think could be improved on. But I will say, to give BSA their credit, it is much better than the R10 reg. It's a definite improvement, and I'm sure with a little bit of cleaning up, it will turn into a perfectly usable regulator. Right then, let's get this put to the side and continue on with the main block. Right then, moving on to the main block here, the first thing we're going to do is remove the barrel. To do that, we'll flip the block up, and I'll just remove this dowty washer from the screw we removed earlier. And now the camera won't pick this up, but if we were to look through this hole here, we would see a brass shaft about in this area here that's pressed into the actual body of the rifle. It's splined so it won't rotate. There's no real easy way to remove it by standard means. If we take a look through this hole here, don't know if the camera will pick it up, but just past this brass section there is a small hole. What we're going to do is take an M4 bolt, a long M4 bolt, along with a big M4 washer, a small M4 washer, and then finally a nut at this end. What we're going to do is thread this into the brass shaft, and then use this nut here to pull the bolt up. So to begin with, we'll push that through that hole there, and then using a 7mm spanner, we'll just get that tightened into the splined shaft. Now the shaft itself isn't threaded, so this is just biting into the brass. But with that tightened up a few turns, we'll tighten the nut onto the washer, and then whilst doing that up, hopefully you can see the bolt head is pulling up, so that shaft is being pushed out the block or pulled out the block. And there we have it. So that's removed from the block nice and easily. If I'm honest, a bit of a disappointing thing to see. I don't think this needs to be in here. And if I'm honest, it does seem to be a theme with the R12. There seems to be anti-tampers on everything, and they definitely don't want you working on your own rifle. But to remove the barrel, all we need to do now is remove these two grub screws here using a 2mm Allen key. And with that done, the barrel can be slid out nicely. So there we have it. This brass spline section fits in this counter bore here and stops you from being able to pull the barrel out even with the two clamping grub screws done up. So that stops you removing the barrel. There is no O-rings or anything around this brass shaft, so I'm pretty sure I can just leave it out when we come to rebuilding the rifle, but we'll see as we get to that process. It's not a fantastically good fit in the hole or anything like that, so we should just be able to leave this section out, and that will just make it easier to remove the barrel in the future. It's nice and easy, or nice and convenient I should say, to remove the barrel, as it makes cleaning the barrel very easy. This is a lot easier to clean than having it inside the block, and for general maintenance purposes, it's always nice to be able to remove the barrel, have a look down it, check for any debris or damage or anything like that. So it's definitely something that you want to change or have a look at when you actually service your rifle. So it is a shame that they have fitted an anti-tamper as obnoxious as this to the rifle. But that's enough moaning on the barrel. What we'll do now is continue on disassembling the main block. The next thing we'll remove is the safety hammer spring and the little guide in the back. To do that, we'll come through and using a set of pliers, we'll just gently remove the anti-tamper we drilled out earlier. So this piece here. Next, we'll use a 2mm Allen key to remove this bolt in the back. Now, on my rifle, this bolt was Loctited in from the factory and done up really tight, so just be careful if you end up needing to remove it, as it's probably full up with Loctite and done up tight. Next, we'll loosen the cocking lever. So to begin with, we'll just open it, and then using a 2.5mm Allen key, we'll remove this bolt at the back. So this one in the back here, and then we'll pull the screw out. With that done, we'll remove this bolt here using a 4mm Allen key, like so, and then we can just push this back cap out the back of the block, so this piece here. With that done, if we take a look in this hole here, I'm not sure if the camera will pick it up, but there is a screw in here that we need to remove using a 2mm Allen key. As you remove it, just keep a small amount of pressure on the safety, just to stop it popping off as you loosen the screw. With the screw removed, if we take our finger off nice and carefully, the safety should just wiggle out nice and safely. Here we have it. So there's our hammer spring, the hammer spring guide in the back, and then our safety assembly with the hammer spring adjuster in the back there. We'll take this apart further very shortly. For now though, the next thing we'll do is remove the hammer from inside the block. To do that, first thing we need to do is have a look in this hole here and remove the two power washers in the bottom there. These are just rubber insulating washers, so they can be pulled out with an Allen key like so. On my rifle it had two, on your rifle it might be slightly different. Then we can loosen this screw in the base using a 3mm Allen key. This one is different from the standard one. I did have to replace my one, as I took it apart I noticed that the actual Allen key didn't fit the head of the screw very nice. It was almost like it was an imperial, or there had been some damage done to the hex head, so I just replaced mine with a flat bottomed grub screw. With that done, we can pull out this pin here, so using a set of pliers, just gently grip this pin and pull it out from the block. And then with that done, we can gently nudge the hammer out the back. There we have it. So it's a little different from the R10 hammer, so it's much lighter than the R10 hammer was, and it fits in this little sleeve quite nicely. So there we have it. At the end of the video I'll weigh the hammer and I'll tell you how much it weighs. For reference, the lightened hammer that we used to make for the R10 was 16.5 grams, so it'll be interesting to see how close that hammer is to R1. Before we remove the pellet probe and the cocking arm, the next thing we'll do is bring back the safety and get this disassembled. To begin with, we'll pull off this little plastic collar here, and what that'll do is expose 2 pins, one on the top, one on the bottom. Now these pins are splined at one end, so one end they'll push out fairly easily, like that one did there, and the other side will be very hard to push out. As you push these pins out, just gently squeeze the safety lightly, and that will allow it to pull apart nice and easily. That removed though, we can gently pull the safety out, being nice and careful not to lose anything, and there we have our hammer spring adjuster in the back. We can disassemble the safety further. If we take out this bolt here, we can remove this arm from this housing, although you can see what goes into it, and I won't bother taking it apart for the video. We do also have a small ball bearing here and a small spring beneath it, so just be aware of that as you take it apart. But there we have it, there's the safety disassembled. Bringing back the block, we can get the pellet probe and the cocking arm removed from the block. First thing we'll do is remove this grub screw in the top of the block using a 1.5mm Allen key, and this grub screw just holds the return spring in place. So we'll remove that, and that'll just make it a little easier to work with the block. Next thing we'll do is remove this cover here and the cocking indicator. To do that, we'll just use a 2mm Allen key, removing these 2 bolts here. With that done, we can pull the tab up, and that exposes the cocking indicator here and a small spring and a shuttle. So we'll take these parts out nice and carefully, making sure nothing gets lost. So there we have it. Next thing we'll do is remove the cocking dog. The cocking dog, I'm not sure if the camera will pick it up, but the cocking dog is roughly here, and it's a 2.5mm Allen key to remove it. Now my one was done up from the factory very tight and using Loctite, so just be aware of that if you end up taking yours apart. But with it loose, we can just gently shake it out of the block, and there we have it. With that removed, the next thing we need to do is remove the small sleeve around the outside of the pellet probe. So this dowel rim piece here, what we need to do is just gently push that forward until we remove it from the end of the pellet probe, and then the pellet probe can just be pulled out the back, being nice and careful of the return spring. So this one here, if you don't push the dowel rim sleeve forward, you won't be able to remove the pellet probe, as the spring here will get caught inside the block and stop you from removing it out the back. However, with it removed, we can just come in from the bottom of the block and push it out the back. Nice and carefully, like so. Right then, and that's the R12 block fully disassembled. Some positive improvements over the older R10 rifle, that's for sure. I like the new regulator design. I like the new lighter hammer. I did weigh the hammer off camera and it comes out to just under 14.5 grams, so a little lighter than our tuning hammer, but we'll have to experiment around with that to see what's the best weight. But overall, some good improvements over the older R10. I will say though that I'm really not a big fan of all the new anti-tampers included. I believe you could probably take out most of these and still get the same job. If you can take out one anti-tamper, you can take out all of them, so I don't see the point in including sort of duplicates to do the same job. And I'm certainly not a fan of the transfer port anti-tamper. Taking out the barrel is a really useful little servicing trick. You can check the barrel, you can clean the barrel, it's nice and easy, and definitely taking out the barrel is something that you want to do on even a light service, to just clean it. So including that, I think, is a real big misstep. But luckily it's fairly easy to remove, or it came out fairly easy on this rifle, so it's not the end of the world, it's just a little disappointing. With that all said though, I'm going to take a look over the components, start making some changes. I think the first thing that I'm going to do is clean up the regulator, but that'll be coming in a separate video. For now though guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.